All right, it's Mark, and so it's time to start our show. And tonight we're going to just basically talk about the principles of animation. And the reason being is our website, our store has a problem, and so I'm going to be working on that right after I end the show because images aren't loading, unfortunately. And so it's been that way, I think, for probably 3 weeks, and I just realized it. Couldn't realize why I wasn't getting very many orders. And then someone asked me a question about the size of our armature kit, and I'm like, well, if they scroll down and they click a picture, it tells them. And so I went on the site to find out for myself exactly the height, and realized, oh great, our pictures aren't loading. And so our theme for the store has to be changed. It's just old, and ZenCart, the system that I use for the store itself, it's been updated and just it doesn't work. So I have to follow about maybe, I don't know how many steps this is, but there's a ton of steps to uploading a new theme, which I'm not even sure it's gonna look nice, but I'll have to work on it. So anyway, here we are. And so tonight I'm going to be reading from a book called The Illusion of The Illusion of Life from Disney Animation. And it's written by Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas. And so I know we've probably gone over these in the past, but these are the principles of animation. And so we're going to kind of just read through these, and maybe is there a way I can pop out this chat? Let's see here. Yeah, so normally I do all this kind of stuff on this screen and then show my other screen, but not tonight. So let's do this, so I can see what you guys are saying. Well, that's not going to work, is it? Let's do this. Make this smaller. All right, so happy Wednesday, Jason. Welcome to the show. All right. So anyway, the principles of animation are things which a lot of people already know, but they're worth repeating and going over again, because I know a lot of people that are who have joined our site and are making animations for our 5-week challenges. These are things that we all need to understand to make good animation and to get our point across and tell our stories. So Janet says, what do you think about modern art? Not only animation? Well, you know what they say, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So it just depends. It depends on what it is. I would say all art is good stuff. Somebody will like art no matter what it is, and if people like it, it's good, right? I guess. All right, so I've got my book here. So the principles of animation. So the first one is squash and stretch. And according to, I'm not sure if this was Frank Thomas or Ollie Johnston who actually wrote this section of the book. But he says, by far the most important discovery was what we call squash and stretch. When a fixed shape is moved about on the paper from one drawing to the next, there is a marked rigidity that is emphasized by the movement. In real life, this occurs only with the most rigid shapes, such as chairs, dishes, and pans. Anything composed of living flesh, no matter how bony, will show considerable movement within its shape in progression through an action. So essentially, they use some examples in the book of like a chipmunk of some sort, or a mouse, and so his mouth is kind of moving, and they're using it's kind of like this, like he's got something in his mouth, and he's kind of looking to the side like this. And so for one frame, it's kind of like his mouth is scrunched with some nuts, maybe that he's eating, or some gum he's chewing. He's got a little ear, and they give him like a hat like this. And then the next frame, what they done is they kind of stretched it out So his cheeks are kind of like oval shapes, and there are two of them, and then he's got a nose, and it kind of comes up, and then his eye. Something like this. And of course, I'm not really drawing this as good as the Disney animators can draw it, but you get kind of the idea of, you know, how everything changes, and his mouth is down here where he's chewing. So, you know, if you're going to analyze this, you know, you're going to see the cheeks kind of stretch, the eyes stretch, the hat kind of, according to what this is, how it's drawn here, his hat didn't actually change shape. There's no stretch or squash in it, but the fleshy parts, like the cheeks especially, so we got round cheek and then a long cheek, you know, like this. So that kind of gives your character a lot more life, and also gives them a more realistic look. So in stop motion, of course, you know, we could probably just get away with the lower half of each face, and we can do replacements, you know, down here we can do replacements. We can, you know, 3D print these, we can sculpt them in clay and mold them. And of course, you know, that's what I did for my film, Zombie Pirate Tales, was I actually had a sliced off lower face that we could use to do that, and to also give some exaggeration and different mouth positions, from, you know, like really wide with teeth. So if this was the face, you know, we would have a lower lip and a tongue or whatever, and it could be stretched out like this. And then from the lower lip up to about under the nose, you know, from the chin to the nose, I guess, I cut that off. And so this would be like the upper head, like this, you know. And then whatever I want it to do, let's see if I can find my eraser here. Oops. That's too big. Let's change that a bit. Okay, there we go. So, you know, we had the head and the ear and the eyes and the nose, and then we had this sort of cutoff point, and then you could just sort of like make the ooh shape, give them some lips, you know, and really from here to here is really dramatic, and that just gives your character so much more of a life to him, you know, and more realistic sort of face, as opposed to, say, some sort of stick-on mouth, kind of like, you know, here's a stick-on mouth, something like Robot Chicken would use, and you can, you know, stick another mouth on there, something like the ooh shape, and maybe just like a line for the or a smile, and these could be all sort of stickers that are cut out and then stuck on the face. But the general face shape would stay round, and it's much more rigid that way. So this is something that, you know, Disney did, but as stop motion animators, we can definitely adopt that as well. So it's a really cool thing to do. So I'm gonna delete this layer. And so then there's anticipation, and this is one thing that I need to probably practice this more often, and for my film, this is something that I need to do as well, because without anticipation, it's very hard to understand what your character is thinking. And so, let's see here. So the text in the book says, here's an excerpt. It says, "The movement in early animations were abrupt and unexpected. Too often the audience was not properly alerted and missed a gag when it came. This was one of the first things Walt Disney started to correct. He called his remedy aiming, and acted out just how an action or gesture could be made clear so that everyone would see it. If Oswald, the lucky rabbit, is to put his hand in his pocket to get a sandwich for lunch, the whole body must relate to that hand and to the pocket. Or the whole body must relate to that hand and to the pocket." So essentially, what they mean by that is, if you're going to grab something out of your pocket, and what they've done, and Oswald is a really simple character, so I should be able to hopefully draw him fairly well. But they draw him kind of like a round head. He's got some kind of ear like this. Another ear. I mean, probably in the 20s, I could have been an animator because my skills are about that good. Or maybe not even that good, but... So his body is just kind of like a round blob, you know, and he's got a belt, sort of a line there, where his pants are, and then his feet are kind of blocky. Really simple character. He's got a hand and an arm. So what they've done is they have a pocket. You know, here's presumably where his pocket is. And actually, I guess what they've drawn is that it's not really in his pocket, but his pants itself. But the hand kind of comes up like this. And they've actually drawn it like this. It's not that well drawn. But just to make a point. So this would be like pose 1, where his hand here is up. And there'd be somewhat of a pause here. So what the audience is doing is they're seeing that, oh, you know, and then he looks down, so his eyeballs look in the downward position. So they know he's going to do something. They don't know what, but there's nothing there to grab. There's no tools. There's no you know, there's no box to put his hand in or anything. So he does that, and then let's see here. And then the next thing he does is, and evidently it looks like he's in the book. It looks like he's picking at an ice cream cone. I don't know how that works, but you can see here. So his head is sort of like this still, and his ears. Hey Don. We're talking about principles of animation tonight. We're gonna, so his hand is here, and it's sort of in his pocket. So something like this. And of course, this is very poorly drawn. I understand that, but you guys get the idea. So if you're animating, you want to make sure that before you have a character, and I see this as a thing that most beginner animators do, is they'll start in a pose that is sort of neutral like this, you know. Let's say this is the same character, and he's just looking off to the side or something. Maybe he's got his hands on his hips, like this. He's got his belt line or whatever, and go instantly from here to here. So what you'd want to do is you want to go, instead of from this pose to this pose, let's first go to this pose right here. So you put your hand up, you have a pause. So you pause this pose for, let's say, oh, maybe, how long would that be? Could even be up to a full second if you wanted to, you know, just to make sure that you're registering that, and then go from that down to this one where he puts his hand in his pocket. So never do it this way. Never go straight ahead like that. And I mean, you can, but this is best for more mechanical movements. Is it not loud enough? Let me see here. I could actually make it a little bit louder. Not really sure if this helps. Does this help? I think I could put the gain up too. Let me see. Oh, I think I got max gain there as well. All right, testing. How's that done? Okay, so I'm going to delete this layer. So that's anticipation. Okay. So hopefully you guys can hear me there. I don't see Don replying. All right, so the next one is staging. Okay. So maybe it's your sound. So staging is the most general of principles because it covers so many areas and goes back so far in the theater. Its meaning, however, is very precise. It is the presentation of any idea so that it is completely and unmistakably clear. An action is staged so that it is understood. A personality so that it is recognizable. An expression so that it can be seen. A mood so that it will affect the audience. Each is communicating to the fullest extent with the viewers when it is properly staged. Okay. So the most important consideration is always the story point. It has been decided, for example, that a certain piece of business will advance the story. Now, how should it be staged? Is it funnier in a long shot where everyone can be seen, or in a close-up featuring the personality? Is it better in a master shot with the camera moving in, or a series of short cuts to different objects? Each scene will have to fit the plan, and every frame of the film must help to make this point of the story. So that's okay, you can hear me? That's good. Yeah, maybe the setting I had in OBS was not proper there, so my apologies. So staging is really, I don't know if I can really draw anything out, but it's more of like an abstract, way of looking at things. You're sort of visualizing what would make the best, how you can get a point across is essentially what staging is. How do you, for example, say, well, this character is going to be angry because somebody knocked over their cup and it broke, So how would you go about that? So you'd have, let's say, two characters. One character maybe doesn't see the cup, and maybe they have a long tail, like they're a dinosaur character and they have a long tail, and the table is behind them, and they turn around and their tail hits the cup, knocks it over, and breaks the handle off on the table. And then the other character has to look at the person, that dinosaur character, and have a response where they're angry. So if you can visualize that, you have to break it down into actual shots. And how would you do that properly? Is there a proper way, an improper way? Well, that's the thing. You have to sort of think it through in your mind. And you want to cut out anything that is unnecessary. Like, you don't want to have, for example, the dinosaur character knocking the cup over with their tail as they turn around, and then had that character sort of like do something like dance or have some sort of bizarre reaction to something else off to the side that they're looking at, because that would distract from the scene where you'd have to have the character get angry at that character, the dinosaur, for knocking their cup over. So you want to sort of narrow everything down to one specific motion, one reaction, and make sure that it advances your story. So that's essentially staging. And that, of course, you would do in, storyboards. That's something that you could work out. And one of the ways that a lot of people like to do it is you get like a wall, and you, for example, here's your wall. I think my Wacom tablet is at an angle, so I can't even draw a straight line here. But using Postit Notes, on a wall like this, where you're sticking them on the wall, and you put them in a sequence, and each Postit note has, your characters on there, drawn out, and all the action is, laid out in each of these little Postit notes. This is the most simple way to do it. You could even use paper and pins, in a wall or something, or maybe, preferably something like a cork board or something. And then you can, move these around. Like maybe move this one here. This one can go up here. This one can go here. You could delete this one. And by moving the stuff around, you can visualize, scene 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's say we're going to delete this one too, And until you go from, left to right on each row, you might want to say, well, we need to add something in there too. So we're going to add another scene here, and that will be very clear to the audience if you follow those steps. But you want to cut out as much of it as you can to get to the point and tell your story, because animation takes a lot of time, and you want to cut to the chase really quickly. All right, so that's basically staging. And of course, you can get expensive storyboard software if you want to, or use like Photoshop, like I'm using now. Whoops. Oh, what are you doing there? There we go. So Janet says, yesterday I watched a review of a bad Polish movie, and creators do too dark shots for soft scenes. Well, there you go. So that would be a good example of poor staging. If they were trying to get across a, let's say, a love scene or something, and it doesn't come across that way, that means they didn't properly think it through, didn't properly stage it. So that's a pretty good example. So next is straight ahead action and pose to pose. Now, pose to pose can be done in stop motion, but it's more difficult. They call it pop throughs. So we could call this pop throughs. So this was done a lot on Nightmare Before Christmas. I think probably Nightmare Before Christmas was one of the first films where they did this. And what a pop through is where you use your Dragon Frame or Stop Motion Pro, or whatever program you're using for capturing your animation. And like, for example, with Jack Skellington, they would animate him, kind of in a pose like this. Well, not animate him, but they'd actually put him in a pose. And they would try to make sure everything would read well with that pose towards the camera. Whatever. And then they would advance, or they would take this this pose, and they would take, for example, maybe 12 frames of this particular pose. And the next pose would be something like where he's, he's got his arms up like this. Oops. Where he's covering his head from something, and he is bent down like this. Can't really think of a scene where he did that, but well, maybe in the part where Oogie Boogie is trying to chase him or whatever. So, and then they would hold this one for, let's say, 6 frames, And then you'd go on to another pose, and you would see how it all worked when you played it back. And then you would take these key poses, this one and this one, and then you would sort of aim for these particular poses on a certain frame number on your exposure sheets. So that would, of course, they really, if you think about in this list here, they go through timing at the bottom of the list on this book. But you kind of want to work your timing out first obviously, before you go to your pop throughs. So really, you kind of need to know timing before you can really know this. But pose to pose is basically, getting the most out of your character's pose to convey an emotion or feeling. And if you guys want to study that more, pantomime is so PANTOMIME is what you want to study. So pantomime is what mimes, would use. They would use body gestures and no speaking at all in order to get a point across. And if you can do that with a stop motion puppet through poses, you have basically used body language to its fullest extent to where that audience will understand exactly what your puppet is feeling, no matter what their emotion is throughout the entire film. So, I mean, if you watch any kind of Pixar films, when a little kid gets excited at something, they kind of like put their hands up and they jump really quickly and their eyes get big, and this is all body language. That little kid does not have to say, I'm happy, you already know it instantly. So that is essentially how you use pop throughs through pose to pose. And straight ahead action is, how do they describe that here? Straight ahead animation will seldom work if there is a strong perspective in the layout or background. Let's see. With pose to pose, there is clarity and strength. In straight ahead action, there is spontaneity. So, essentially, straight ahead is kind of like the Roadrunner. If you guys have watched some of the cartoons of the Roadrunner, where the Roadrunner just kind of sticks his tongue out and goes beep beep, and then is instantly, is like just a streak, right? So that's kind of more or less like where a straight ahead action is used, with a little bit of anticipation with the meep meep sound that he makes. So let's see. Well, I want to get through all these, so I'm going to try and go through this a little bit quicker now. So follow through and overlapping action is another fairly well-known thing, but a lot of people don't use that. So when a character entering a scene reached the spot for his next action, he often comes to a sudden and complete stop. This was stiff and did not look natural, but nobody knew what to do about it. Walt was concerned. Things don't come to a stop all at once, guys. First there's one part and then another. Several different ways were eventually found to correct these conditions. They were called either follow through or overlapping action, and no one really knew where one ended and the other began. There seemed to be 5 main categories. Number 1 was if the character has any appendages, such as long ears or a tail or a big coat, these parts continue to move after the rest of the figure has stopped. This is easy to see in real life. The movement of each must be timed carefully so it will have the correct feeling of weight, and it must continue to follow through in the pattern of action in a believable way, no matter how broadly it is cartooned. 2 is the body itself does not move all at once, but instead it stretches, catches up, twists, turns, and contracts as the forms work against each other. Now that's something that is easier to do in two-dimensional animation, but let's go to number 3 here. So the loose flesh on a figure, such as the cheeks or Donald Duck's body or almost all of Goofy, will move at a slower speed than the skeletal parts. So essentially, if you can think of this, take like a chopstick and put a wet noodle on the end of it and kind of wave it back and forth. So if we have our straight stick. And then we have a noodle that is overlapping, going over the top. Like this. When we move that stick to the right, so let's say we do that. This is our, frame number 6 or something like that after that. Maybe that quick movement will have the noodle kind of going like this. So from straight up, as it moves this way, and then the stick is here, and then the noodle is kind of flowing behind the stick right here. Right, so it's going in that direction, and then at the end, whoops. So when the stick has stopped, after that, finally the wet noodle will catch up. And if I use different colors here, I can use a different color. And you'll end up with something sort of like this, where the stick has completely stopped, but the noodle has moved like this. So the blue being one frame, the purple being another, and the green another. And that's really it. And so if you have any kind of a character that has like a beanie hat or something, like a Smurf, and then they move their head forward, and then the head stops, you want that beanie to kind of move in a forward direction as well. But this action here of the hat happens or continues to move after the head is at a complete stop. So that's pretty much it. I mean, the same goes for like coattails, or maybe a character has hair or some kind of a tail, like a cat. Even something like a finger can do that, because the finger is lighter than the hand, So Janet says, some time ago a friend asked me how many need frames for a wink. How many frames for a wink? It's not very many. It's only about maybe 2 to 3. It depends on how fast and slow you want to do it. So 2 to 3 frames like in the down position of a lid, and then 2 or 3 in an up direction after that. And you might want to hold the wink as well for a few frames, like when the eye is kind of winked all the way down. So let's see. So follow through and overlap. So slow in and slow out. And so this is something that you could do with your animation as well. Let's draw a quick character here. So a very simple character. Feet. And here's the arms. Very long stick arms. Okay. Here's the eyes. And here's the mouth. Alright. And they're wearing a t-shirt with the number 3. So this character is going to move the arm in an up direction. If we were to follow, what we've done, or what we've already gone through here, we could either move the arm up instantly, or what we could do is we could first move the arm down slightly, and then maybe we could have the eyelids go down and have a little bit of anticipation, and then move the arm up. But before we move it in either direction, what slowing in and slowing out is talking about is, first, if we were to zoom in on the arm, so if we're going to do some anticipation, we're going to move this arm to the left. We would first move it in a very small increment here to the left. which would be barely visible to the camera. So just a little bit. And then we would move it a little bit more. And a little bit more. And then we would slow out of that motion. So we would, instead of moving the distance far, we would move that distance slightly smaller and then come to a stop. So that's how you would move it. And then you would do your pause, right? So that would be our anticipation here. And then we would move it back up. And so if we were going to move it from this pose, now if we did our pop throughs, we might find that having the arm with an elbow bend up to here would be good. So we want to aim for this pose on the right. I'm just going to box this off here. So here's pose 1, and here's the second pose, okay? And so we would try to figure out, and of course we haven't gotten to timing yet, but we would try to figure out how many frames it would take to get from one to the second position. Now let's say we want to do it within 8 frames. So we would move this arm. Let's use a different color. We would slowly move the arm just a little bit to the right. Okay, that would be our, this would be our pose, or frame 1, frame 2, and we know this has got to be frame 8. So we know that we would have to also ease out, and we want to make sure that we move that last frame just a little bit to ease out, like this. So this would be frame 7. And we haven't gotten to arcs yet either. We need to think about arcs. Everything kind of moves on an arc. So we want to make sure we have an arc in there. And you'll notice that if you buy a computer program like Dragon Frame, you'll see that you can actually draw arcs within the program. And on that, you could actually break it down into frames as well and have little tick marks on here. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this would be our frames. And we would move our hand then to here. And then to here. And here. And here. And there. So that would be essentially what you do. But the easing or slowing in and slowing out are these last 2 frames, which are very close together. And you could even have it where these 2 center frames, 4 and 5, are a little bit farther apart. And you could even have some overlap between 3 and 2 so that you're not equally spacing all of these frames, but you're making the fastest point between them in the very center of the move. I know it can get kind of complicated, but that's kind of the basis of how it works. Right, so that's slow in and slow out. And then arcs. So there's a lot of importance to arcs. Let's see what the book says about it. Let me see if I can find the page here. Okay, so arcs. Very few living organisms are capable of moves that have a mechanical in and out or up and down precision. The action of a woodpecker might be an exception, and because of the restrictions of an external skeleton, they are undoubtedly some examples in the insect. There are undoubtedly some examples in the insect world, but the movements of most living creatures will follow a slightly circular path. The head seldom thrusts straight out, then back again. It lifts slightly or drops as it returns. Perhaps this has to do with the weight or maybe the inner structure of the higher forms of life. But whatever the reason, most movements will describe an arc of some kind. Okay, So even if a head is turned, whoops. So if we have two head positions, where the character is looking left and ends up looking to the right like this, from left to right, you would not draw an in-between head right in the center level line like this, okay, with the eyes right in the middle. Okay. You wouldn't do that. You would sort of move the head in a more downward position. So let me change color again. So here would be sort of the arc that we're talking about, and I'll use a yellow color to, so kind of like this. All right. Almost everything in nature moves that way. Nothing has that sort of mechanical, straight, linear motion like that. One of the things that you could do is, if you're making a robot character, you could specifically aim for animating that character in very straight lines like that. Because robots, of course, are mechanical. They have precise little parts in there, bearings and rods and whatnot. So straight animation like that is kind of beneficial in some circumstances. But if it's organic, if it's alive, you want to aim for more of this kind of arc motion. That's really all there is to it. I mean, there's a lot of examples you could think of, I'm sure. Delete this. Yeah, Winx are kind of an interesting thing, aren't they? There's actually there's like a science behind Winx, and even blinks. Their eyeballs tend not to stay straight, like I was saying before. There's always a kind of an arc motion. When you're blinking, even your eyes kind of move downward slightly and then pop back up as the eyelid rises. It's kind of weird. All right, so secondary action, I think we kind of covered that with follow-up and overlapping action, but let's see what secondary action, what they say about it. Often the one idea being put over in a scene can be fortified by subsidiary actions within the body. A sad figure wipes a tear as he turns away. Someone stunned shakes his head as he gets to his feet. A flustered person puts on his glasses as he regains his composure. When this extra business supports the main action, it is called secondary action, and is always kept subordinate to the primary action. If it conflicts or becomes more interesting or dominant in any way, it is either the wrong choice or is staged improperly. So remember what I was saying before, like if the dinosaur with the long tail turns and knocks the cup over, and the other character is looking and they're going to get angry, but the dinosaur then decides to do some kind of funny little dance or something and takes away from the main motion and what that you're trying to get across, that the tail knocks over the glass, that is incorrect staging. So really, we already covered that. And then timing. Or wait, exaggeration? Okay, I guess we didn't go over exaggeration. But, oh, okay, no, I skipped a part. I see what they did there. Okay, so timing. The amount or the number of drawings used in any move determines the amount of time that action will take on the screen. If the drawings are simple, clear, and expressive, the story point can be put over quickly, and this was all that concerned the animators during the early period. Timing in those cartoons was limited mainly to fast moves and slow moves, with accents and thrusts calling for special handling. But the personalities that were developed were defined more by their movements than their appearance, and the varying speed of those movements determined whether the character was lethargic, excited, nervous, or relaxed. Neither acting nor attitude could be portrayed without paying very close attention to timing. So they have kind of a list here of what they call in-betweens. So what that means is when we were talking about pose to pose and pop-throughs, where you have one sort of pose and then you want to go to the next pose, so there'd be two poses, right? So if you have no in-betweens between those two poses, the character would come across as being hit by a tremendous force. His head is nearly snapped off. If you have one in-between between those two poses, one in-between frame, so you're moving your character's hand and head, exactly in the center of where the second pose will be. If you have only one frame, it looks like it has been hit by a brick, a rolling pin, or a frying pan. Two in-betweens, the person has a nervous tic, a muscle spasm, and uncontrollable twitch. With three in-betweens is dodging the brick, rolling pin, or frying pan. So they're kind of dodging it, and it's a little bit slower, and you can sort of it reads as a slower action to the audience, right? Because there's more frames. So four in-betweens is giving a crisp order, get going, move it. And then five in-betweens is more friendly, over here, come on, hurry. Six in-betweens sees a good-looking girl or the sports car he has always wanted. So you can see that these motions of like a head, for example, are slower and slower. Seven in-betweens tries to get a better look at something. Eight in-betweens searches for the peanut butter on the kitchen shelf. Nine in-betweens appraises, considering thoughtfully. And 10 in-betweens is stretches a sore muscle. So that kind of gives you a good idea of how many in-betweens and how slow the motion, depending on how slow it is with the more frames, how it comes across to an audience. And Donna's saying the animator's survival guide is also great. Yep, absolutely. There's actually a few really great books that I would really recommend that people buy. This one here is really good for beginners, I think, because it kind of covers the whole gamut of things. And they've got like a little, you can sort of flip through frames on the edge of the book to watch characters animate. It's kind of neat. So let's see, we've got Exaggeration next. So it says here there was some confusion among the animators when Walt first asked for more realism and then criticized the result because it was not exaggerated enough. In Walt's mind, there was probably no difference. He believed in going to the heart of anything and developing the essence of what he found. If a character was to be sad, make him sadder, bright, make him brighter, worried, make him more worried, wild, make him wilder. Some of the artists had felt that exaggeration meant a more distorted drawing or an action so violent it was disturbing. They found they had missed the point. When Walt asked for realism, he wanted a caricature of realism. One artist analyzed it correctly when he said, "I don't think he meant realism. I think he meant something that was more convincing, that made a bigger contact with people, and he just said realism because real things do every so often in the animation. The character would do something unconvincing or to show how clever the animator was, and it wasn't real, it was phony. Walt would not accept anything that destroyed believability, but he seldom asked an animator to tame down an action if the idea was right for the scene." Dave Hand told of a test he had done of Mickey riding along in the taxicab, whistling with everybody on the car, rattling and bouncing. When they had come to the corner, the car skidded and blew out a tire, at which point the car sagged, the license plates twirled, and landed with its numbers upside down and spelled "oh heck." Dave was sure that this was a laugh, and he was careful to stage it so that it could not be missed. Evidently, he had not considered the whole car as carefully, for Walt complained of the lack of action and asked him to do it over. The next test received the same reaction. It's not broad enough. It's not funny. 6 times Dave corrected the action, erasing and redrawing until he was nearly through the paper, and still Walt did not feel the action was spirited enough for what he wanted. At that point, Dave got fed up. The only thing I knew to do was to do something he wouldn't take, to make it so extreme that he would say, "I didn't mean that much." So I went back and did something horribly distorted. I was kind of proud of myself and couldn't wait for the film to come back. I put it on the Moviola, which is a machine that they would play back film on, and Walt came and ran it a few times, then stepped back and looked at me. I thought he was going to tell me to leave the studio, but he said, "There, Dave, that's just what I wanted." It taught me what to do at the Disney studio. From then, I never had any trouble with exaggeration. When I was directing, I used to say to the animators, "Will you do something for me? Will you make it so extreme that you make me mad?" So that's basically it. But they don't have like an example here. You know, they just kind of have it in words, so I can't sketch anything for you guys. But that is, you know, you want to make it so that the audience is really, there's no sort of, what's the word? There's no need to guess as to what happened, basically. So this one is The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. 2 of the 9 old men, and they kind of recant some of their stories as well as some of the stories of the other animators as well. And Ken says, I also recommended Animation Unleashed. It gives you a basic breakdown of animated films in a variety of styles. Cool. I don't have that book, so that sounds really good. Then we go to, they talk about solid drawing, which is, of course, you know, when you're making a puppet, when you're making puppets, it's very hard to do that because you're, of course, sculpting. See something here real quick. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, of course, they're talking about, they have a drawing of Mickey Mouse, and he looks very wooden, which means that there's no, it's very symmetrical. It looks like the character is standing perfectly straight. So as an example here, I'll just draw stick figures. So we have a stick figure that is perfectly upright like this, or really straight, and it has a head, and then this is the pose, you know. And this looks very rigid, you know, everything's kind of straight across like this. We got the elbows lined up, got the hands lined up, we got the feet lined up, we've got everything perfectly up and, you know, straight up and down like this. And it's very rigid, it looks wooden. And if you've ever, you know, read about politics, they used to say Al Gore was very wooden. Al Gore was the vice president of Bill Clinton, and his body would seem very much like this diagram where everything is straight, you know, very, very perfectly straight. Japanese people tend to have very straight backs, you know. They are considered conservative, you know. So you could use these kind of stereotypes and things to your advantage. You know, if you want a character to be very boring, make them exactly symmetrical like this and very straight. So then they drew the same character, which would be like Mickey Mouse, and they have a different pose where we've got two arms, and then the hand like this, and the fingers kind of come off to the side, and there's like this bend at the hips, and then we got the feet. Maybe the feet kind of go like this, and then the head is like this, and the eyes are kind of at an angle a little bit. So everything has got like a curve to it. The back is bent, and there's no, like, one hand is in this direction, this one is lower. So everything is more appealing that way. It's much more appealing. And so if you're going to animate your character, you want to make sure that you're going, like I said, like what we talked about before, which is the pose to pose. You want to make sure that you're going from one nice pose like this, and you're not transitioning to this, and you're not starting at something like that and transitioning to this. You want to have two nice poses. So maybe this character is, going to, I don't know, just pick any pose, that tells your story, and try and see what looks good. And then, with the stop motion puppet, it's really easy to go and pose that puppet around, especially if they're ball and socket, and see what looks nicest. So maybe the character is now looking up, and they're kind of putting their hands up. So go from this pose to this pose over here, which would be much better than going from, this pose to a very straight pose like that. So that is solid drawing sculpting. I don't really know if I'm going to call it sculpting, but I think the proper word might be solid poses in the case of stop motion, because we are trying to convert and translate all these two-dimensional terms into 3D. But all right, so the last one is appeal. And so appeal is something that comes with practice. If you're going to sculpt a lot, you want to make sure your characters look fun. You want to make sure they look neat and cute or whatever. I don't know. Depends on what you're trying to do. But you don't want your characters to be boring to look at. So, here's an example of what might be appealing versus something that is maybe something like this. So when you start sculpting, your characters will tend to look like this, and over time, you'll get more practice and see what works and what looks nice, and it will look more like that, which is, of course, a very horrible example because I can't draw, but it's really important. And let me read a little bit about it from the book. Where is it here? Appeal. So it says, appeal was very important from the start. The word is often misrepresented to suggest cuddly bunnies and soft kittens. To us, it meant anything that a person likes to see. A quality of charm, pleasing design, simplicity, communication, and magnetism. So, I think, that pretty much explains everything, but it goes on to say that your eye is drawn to the figure that has appeal, and once there, it is held while you appreciate what you are seeing. A striking heroic figure can have appeal. A villainess, even though chilling and dramatic, should have appeal. Otherwise, you will not want to watch what she is doing. The ugly and repulsive may capture your gaze, but there will be neither the building of character nor identification with the situation that will be needed. There is shock value, but no story strength. So if you understand it really helps to tell your story when your character looks interesting. Think about, for example, if you're into the Star Wars films, Boba Fett. If Boba Fett looked like Jar Jar Binks, how would that make any sense? Even if Jar Jar was the meanest look, you kind of give him a frown, give him maybe some red glowing eyeballs. It would read as really stupid. Nobody would be afraid of Jar Jar Binks. So that would be kind of an example from a film where you can imagine two characters and how the appeal of the character makes all the difference when you're telling the story. All right, so that covers it. I've covered everything in exactly 1 hour, which is kind of a miracle. But hopefully that helps you guys and gives you guys some ideas when you're working on your animation. Try to remember all of these different principles, and they'll help you make better films. All right, well, catch you guys all next week. Thanks for stopping by, everybody.